Hello, this is the second part of this story. If you haven't seen the first one, we recommend you watch it first. For a moment, I thought maybe I should drop everything and go to the police, let them sort it out. But I pushed it away. I couldn't be 100% sure that my adversary wasn't hiding something from me. Hired killers are notorious liars. I should know. There's still a lot to figure out. There was no time to dwell and complain about betraying my wife. We must act without unnecessary emotion, like in war. The main thing is that I know who my enemy is, and we will figure out the details in the process. For the moment, the decision must be made without hesitation. I stood up sharply, at the same time loading a cartridge into the chamber. I raised my right hand to shoulder level and squeezed the trigger. There was a quiet pop, as if a bottle of champagne had been uncorked. A red hole appeared in the villain's forehead, and he tumbled backward with the chair. Although a bullet from a TT cartridge is light enough, it would still knock a man down at that distance. Leaving everything in the living room as it was, I left the house and walked down the rugged stone stairs to the lake. The body was there. I pulled an anchor out of the water, in the form of a cast iron stock, and carefully tied it to the leg of the drowned man. I stood there contemplating my next move. Am I gonna drag him with the load into the boat? Grunting, I untied the anchor and, with difficulty, dragged the body into the boat. I tied it with a chain to a metal ring that was hammered into the pier. Then I loaded the improvised anchor onto the boat, retrieved the oars from the boathouse, and climbed in. It would be ironic if it was holy. I pushed off from the dock, placed the oars in the paddles, and propelled the boat along the reedy shore. When I got a fair distance away, I tied the anchor to the leg of the corpse and pushed it into the water. As I expected, the body slowly sank to the depths. That's where I sent the gun to. When I returned to the house, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. I brought canisters of gasoline from the car and carefully placed them in the corridor. I went to the bedroom and, rummaging through the closet, pulled out my old jacket. I carefully put it on the lying bandit, then placed his wedding ring on his finger and a wristwatch on his wrist. I threw his cell phone on the floor, then I put some wood in the fireplace. I guess that's it. Time to go. I lifted a canister with both hands and sprinkled some on the living room floor, the motionless body, and the walls. Then I used the second canister to sprinkle the front door, and gradually pouring out the gasoline, I moved 10 meters away from the house. After all the preparations, it was time to leave. After placing the canisters near the wall, I returned to the house and lit a match, throwing it into a puddle of gasoline. My past had caught up with me, and I found myself at war once again. Despite society's attempts to suppress male aggression, men will always remain warriors. While some may be influenced by their grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and wives to become passive and money-making machines for women, a true man will always be ready to fight back. Wars have always existed and will continue as long as there are those who desire someone else's wife, house, or land. The orchestrators of my current situation thought they were dealing with a weak and bespectacled man, but they underestimated me. I will prove them wrong soon enough. The next day was damp and cold as I walked towards the highway. I had to leave my car behind to maintain the illusion that the drunken owner had burned down his house. My past was burned with him, and there was no going back. I had to see this through to the end. My top priority was to get to town, go to the office, and block all the accounts before it was too late. My deputy and cousin also had the authority to handle the company's accounts, but my wife had given her lover a wedding gift in the form of my death and the company's downfall. I cursed myself for trusting those closest to me. I couldn't understand how my wife, who had lived with me for so many years and bore my children, could betray me so cruelly. I couldn't bear to think of how my children would look at me now. 2 hours later, I reached the highway, and by lunchtime, I was in town. My first task was to get a cell phone, then go to the office, and finally find a place to stay until Monday. I needed to gather my essentials, empty my safe deposit box, and deal with my family before disappearing. Time was running out and there was a lot to do. I quickly solved the cell phone issue by buying the cheapest phone and SIM card from a kiosk. I had all the necessary numbers memorized, including my secretary Ladaka's. She was delighted to hear from me, and in half an hour I was at her apartment in a residential area on the outskirts of the city. Without asking any unnecessary questions, Lita made me coffee. I could see the struggle in her flushed face as she debated whether to undress immediately or save the most delicious thing for the evening. The evening was rapidly approaching and the wait was not long. However, I decided to postpone the important tasks for later and asked Leda to go to the office. Today is Saturday and my appearance will not go unnoticed. Security will report my visit to my brother, Vadim Olegovich, who is also my boss. They will realize that I am alive and may try to take measures against me. What kind of measures? It's not hard to guess. Leda's main task was to retrieve the tablet from the safe in my office. It was not difficult for her to enter the building. What was her business? Once inside, she would disable the alarm. They are unlikely to search her on the way out, as she is the chief's confidant. It would be easy for her to sneak the tablet in her handbag. I thoroughly explained everything to my agent. She listened attentively, batting her long eyelashes, and nodded understandingly from time to time. After understanding the task, Leda couldn't resist and kissed me on the cheek before leaving. I closed the front door, and now all we had to do was wait. Every man has a sixth sense, but only some have it developed enough to ring at the right moment. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. In my previous life, my ability to sense danger before it manifested itself saved my life more than once. Gradually, I learned to trust my instincts. Now my gut was not just ringing, it was roaring, filling me with a sense of impending danger. I got up from my chair and walked towards the front door. It was quiet. As I was about to return to the room, I heard footsteps outside. Someone was coming up the landing. I listened carefully and the footsteps faded. Maybe Leda had returned? It didn't seem likely, as she would have immediately opened the door. Then I heard someone whispering to me. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear that there was more than one person at the door. The whispering grew louder, and I distinctly heard a muffled shriek from a woman. There was no one else but Leda who would shout. I heard the key rattling in the keyhole, followed by the lock clicking and the door slowly opening. I stood behind the wall, not yet interfering in the process. The light in the room was on, providing enough light in the corridor. A man with a shaved head appeared in the doorway. He froze for a moment as if sniffing before stepping into the apartment. He had a gun in his hand, but I didn't react. I needed to know how many people had come to meet me. After the first man, a second one entered the apartment. He held Leda, who seemed to be struggling, with one hand, and covered her mouth with the other. There was no one else. There must have been a third person. The driver stayed outside in the car. It looks like Leda got caught with a clipboard after all. The guards decided to check who was so fast. They knew nothing about me, or there would have been more. All these thoughts rushed through my head like a whirlwind. My brain had already given the command to act. I took a step, and with the thumb of my right hand, I pressed the Z-point on the bandit's neck. He immediately collapsed. I held him and Leda, gently lowering him to the floor. The first bandit did not hear anything. Kuzia, leave that whore. You have time to play. Come here, came his voice from the depths of the apartment. I peeked into the room. The character was looking at something on the windowsill. He didn't even turn around. I hit the pump neck with the edge of my hand, and the bandit collapsed on the floor without a sound. The gun fell out of his hand and slid across the parquet against the wall. Of course, it was not gentlemanly to attack from behind. I should have called out to my opponent, and we would have circled the room for a long time, striking each other swiftly until one of us hit the target. Beautiful but stupid. The bandit would probably just shoot me, and then he'd have to figure out who was who. So no glamour. I picked up the gun and returned to the hallway. Leda came to her senses a little and tried to get up. Her abuser did not move. I helped the girl get up and walked her to the couch. Then I brought a wet towel and gently wiped the blood from her broken lip. She stared at me silently for a while, then suddenly asked, "Did you kill them?" "No, just knocked them out." I didn't tell them anything. "They don't know you're here at the front desk," I reassured her. The receptionist sobbed, her face wrinkled and tears spurted from her eyes. "They hit me. But I didn't say anything. She cried. I put my arm around Leda's shoulders. I know. I fetched some water, I said, trying to calm her down. We have to get out of here. I stroked her face and kissed her. Did you come in a car? Yes, it's in the driveway. The driver is there, Leda replied. It's just as I thought. Well, it's not yet evening. I tied the uninvited guests with a clothesline and pushed Leda to go out. Come on. We carefully went downstairs and I saw through a half-open door entryway a black Land Cruiser, frozen motionless not far from the steps. There was music playing and a red cigarette light. Stay here, I said softly to Leda and myself, lifting the collar of my jacket headed for the car. I staggered from side to side. I carefully imitated a drunken man. When I approached the Land Cruiser, I unzipped my fly and began to urinate on the back wheel of the Japanese car. Hey, what are you doing? There was so much genuine bitterness and resentment in the driver's voice that I almost interrupted the process. The man stepped resolutely toward me, intending to strangle me for such blasphemy. I turned to him and, smiling stupidly, wet his boots. It was too much. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tattooed fist fly into my face. I swung to the right and kicked the bandit in the groin with my left foot. The man groaned and bent over, involuntarily clenching his knees and crossing his arms over his private area. I know it hurts. I kicked him in the face with my right foot, from bottom to top. My head jerked back, and my opponent fell on his back, squeaking something. I ripped open the door. On the right seat was a Beretta with a silencer. The ignition key was stuck in the lock. I started the engine. Quick, get in the car. I shouted into the darkness of the driveway. Leda quickly jumped into the seat next to me. I jerked out of my seat, drove through the archway, and into the stream of cars. I had to find a safe place to hide the girl, and I already knew where. This happened about 2 years ago. I was driving home, repeating to myself that I needed to buy bread. The day before, my wife and I had a big fight, and she had gone with the girls to her mother's to cry on her shoulder. At home, yesterday's cold dumplings and a bottle of beer were waiting for me. By my standards, it was a fancy feast. It was late autumn. The wheels of the car were crunching over the thin ice in the frozen puddles. I was in a lousy mood, things were not going well at work, and there were problems in the family. I had already turned to the store when I noticed some commotion in the bushes. When I got out of the car, I saw 2 young thugs trying to snatch a bag of groceries from an older man. They were counting on easy prey, but the old man held firm, bravely repelling the blows of his attackers. But then I noticed a 3rd man approaching from behind. I ran up to the place of the fight and kicked one of the attackers in the groin with my right foot, then turned on my heel and didn't hesitate to hit the other in the cheekbone with my right hand. He flew aside and fell to the ground, unsteady on his feet. While I was dealing with the first 2, the grandfather finished off the 3rd. Thank you, young man. You needn't have bothered. I could have done it myself. The old man gleefully adjusted his crooked cap, but thank you all the same. Yes, you're welcome. You really could have done it yourself. I smiled as I watched the defeated youths supporting each other, groaning into the darkness of the alley. My name is Ivan Augustinovich, but you can just call me Dad. And so our friendship began. The old man invited me to dinner. My black-eyed, almond-shaped wife and crying children were not waiting for me at home, so I accepted the invitation without hesitation. We reached the end of the streetcar, turned into a lane, and found ourselves at a wooden 1-story house, surrounded by a high metal lattice fence. A huge Caucasian shepherd dog rushed out to meet us. "Step, our people," said Grandpa loudly, and the dog wagged its tail. "Come on in." We went up to the porch, and the owner pushed the front door open. Inside the house was clean and warm. The stove was burning in a corner of the large living room, birch logs crackling merrily. The old man stoked the wood with the poker. A sheaf of sparks rose to the vault of the firebox. The furniture was vintage and antique, a little bulky but solid. Beautifully crafted stuffed animals hung on one wall. The heads of a boar, a deer, a wolf, and a bear hung on one wall. Then came quite exotic heads of buffalo and grinning leopard. To all appearances, these were the hunting trophies of the owner. On the other 2 walls, where there were no windows, the rugs were hung with a vast collection of cold weapons, antique daggers, swords, some curious knives and flintlocks, and God knows what else. The soft nap of the carpets accentuated the gracefulness of the forms and the hidden power of the steel. I caught the owner's proud look. I was not always old. The latter grinned through his gray mustache. We were once trotters too. He did not finish and made an inviting gesture. Sit down. The old man nodded at a chair opposite the stove. Would you like some tea? I nodded. The man came to the table and poured into a porcelain cup of hot, thick tea from an aluminum kettle. With herbs fragrant, he handed me a full mug. I took a sip. Slightly sweet and sour, the drink pleasantly warmed my throat and stomach. While I was drinking tea, Grandpa deftly assembled the table. Stewed potatoes with rabbit, cabbage, pickles, and raw eggs. Finally, a bottle of whiskey appeared on the table. Please, we drank and took our time and ate. It was so cozy, as if I had lived in this house half of my life. Weariness had gone away, anxiety had disappeared. Everything around me became familiar and comforting. Then, the first time we met, Grandfather took an unusual dagger off the wall with a wavy blade. "To Malay Chris," he said. "A beautiful and cruel weapon. With its unusual blade, it is believed to ward off the dark forces and remain loyal to its master until the end. A friend gave me this, Chris." The old man paused, as if remembering something, and then he handed the dagger to me. "Take it as a keepsake." I, remembering the custom, began to take out the money. The master smiled. "You don't have to pay for this gift." Time passed. I made friends with Grandfather and often visited him. He lived alone, and I did not pry into his soul with questions about the reasons for his loneliness. To tell the truth, I did not quite understand who he was. He was either a military man or a geologist, and Grandfather himself did not tell about it. That's where I decided to take the lead. After driving a few blocks, we abandoned the car, taking the gun. You can never have too many guns, especially in my situation. We took the streetcar to the last stop. We walked about 300 meters along a dark alley, and I knocked on a familiar gate. The dog barked. The door opened, and Grandpa appeared in the doorway. "Who is here?" I greeted him. "Hi, Grandfather." "Ah, Yura." The old man came down from the porch and opened the gate. For a while he looked at me, then, without saying a word, turned aside to let us into the yard. And then I remembered the main thing. "Grandfather, did you bring the tablet?" Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating for us. We need your feedback to improve our content.